The Grand Assembly rose from the heart of Veluria Prime like a fossilized ribcage, 67 kilometers of bone-white arches and judgment balconies, where the galaxy's ruling species had gathered for 12,000 cycles. Ambassador Elias Vance stood at the human delegation's table, positioned so far from the central podium that his voice required relay drones just to reach the nearest council member. He had requested this hearing 311 days ago. They had granted him 17 minutes. Delegation from Earth, intoned the Velurian High Arbiter, a creature whose segmented body suggested evolutionary ancestry with burrowing predators. His name was Threshval, and he had not once looked directly at Vance during the proceedings. Your petition for territorial expansion into the Sigurd Expanse has been reviewed. Vance waited. The chamber held 42 species, each with their own definitions of courtesy, patience, and contempt. He had learned them all. The request is denied, Threshval continued. Around him, a ripple of amusement passed through the upper balconies. Furthermore, the Assembly questions humanity's standing to submit any claim, given your species' demonstrated inability to maintain orbital security against your own stellar debris. Laughter. Open, theatrical laughter from the Cathari delegation, avian creatures whose homeworld had joined the Council 6,000 years before Earth even developed radio. Vance's diplomatic attaché, Myra Chen, touched his wrist beneath the table. The gesture meant hold. He had trained her. She had trained him. Their partnership had survived 18 near-extinction events, 3 assassination attempts, and 1 very creative customs violation on Corvus Station. He held. The Council recognizes the Velurian Empire's preliminary recommendation, Threshval said, finally turning his main eye cluster toward the human table. Earth will accept protected minor status. Your military fleet will be decommissioned under Velurian supervision. Your colonized worlds will submit to administrative oversight. Your interstellar travel will require council-approved routing. Silence. Vance's 17 minutes had just been reduced to whatever remained of his composure. Protected minor status. The same designation given to species that had lost interstellar wars or suffered biological collapse. The same designation carried by the Threll, whose homeworld had been a nature preserve for the last 3 centuries. That's not a recommendation, Vance said. His voice carried further than anyone expected. Human vocal cords, optimized for forests and open plains, projected through the relay drones like stones skipping across still water. That's a surrender document. The chamber went still. Not silent, still, as if every breathing organism had simultaneously decided to see what the ape thing would do next. Threshval's mandibles twitched. Your emotional reaction confirms the assessment. Humanity is too volatile for sovereign status in contested space. The Velurian Empire offers protection. This is generous. Vance looked around the chamber. He saw the Ilmater delegation, amphibious creatures who had traded their own client species for trade concessions. He saw the Grillan technocracy, whose representatives had not spoken a single word in 40 sessions because they were waiting for the optimal moment. He saw the Xylos Collective, whose 1,000-member hive mind had already decided humanity's fate based on profit margins. Not one of them would speak for Earth. Generous, Vance repeated. He stood. Myra's hand tightened on his wrist. The Council has spent 300 days reviewing our petition. You've spent 300 days deciding how to dismantle us without appearing aggressive. You're afraid of what we might become, so you've decided to make us nothing instead. The Cathari ambassador, a feathered creature named Sarek, rose from his perch. You overestimate your importance, human. Earth is not even the most significant threat in your own star system. Your moon causes more navigational hazards than your fleet. More laughter. This time, Vance noticed which delegations didn't join in. The handful of minor species who had watched their own protected minor status hearings from this same distant table. the ones who already knew how the story ended. Vance reached into his jacket. Every security drone in the chamber focused on his hand. He withdrew a single data shard, unremarkable, mass-produced, the kind sold by the thousands on every station in council space. "I request a recess," he said. "Denied," Threshold replied. "I request equal voting rights for Earth's delegation." "Denied." "I request that the Council reconsider its position before humanity does something unfortunate." The laughter stopped, not because Vance had said something threatening, but because he was smiling. Not a predator's smile, not cold fury, just the expression of a man who had run out of reasons to pretend. "What could humanity possibly do?" Sarek asked, feathers flattening against his skull. Vance placed the data shard on the table. He tapped it once. The Council's translators registered the word he spoke next in 42 languages. "Leave." The chamber's atmosphere processors hummed, struggling to maintain optimal conditions for 42 different biologies. Somewhere in the ventilation system, a filter was failing. Vance could smell the faint chemical tang of recycled oxygen, and beneath it, the distinct musk of Velurian dominance pheromones. They were pumping it through the delegation sections, trying to induce submission. Myra had warned him about the pheromones 48 hours ago. She'd spent 3 months reverse engineering the delivery system from maintenance records she wasn't supposed to access. "They're going to make an example of us," she'd said in their quarters that morning. "The border conflicts are escalating. The Velurians need to show their allies they can control rising species before anyone else gets ideas." Vance had nodded. He'd known this would happen from the moment he accepted the ambassadorship. The Council didn't fear human weapons, they feared human reproduction. 300 years of exponential growth across the outer colonies. 7 billion people on Earth alone. A species that treated extinction events as minor setbacks and turned survival instincts into Olympic sports. "You will have one standard cycle to accept the terms," Threshold continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of a recitation. "Upon acceptance, Earth will designate decommissioning ports for all vessels exceeding diplomatic classification. Your military personnel will be reassigned to civilian roles under Velurian supervision. Your colonies will receive administrative governors within 90 days. He paused, mandibles clicking in what might have been satisfaction. "Should you refuse, the Council will consider humanity's territorial claims null and void. Your colonies will be designated unclaimed space. Any species may claim them. Any species may defend those claims with whatever force they deem appropriate." The Ilmater ambassador's throat pouch pulsed, the amphibian equivalent of a smile. They had already identified 3 human colony worlds within easy striking distance. Vance had seen the reconnaissance reports. The Ilmater had been massing ships near the border for 6 months, waiting for this moment. "That's not negotiation," Vance said. "That's a funeral arrangement." "Humanity chose its own grave," Sarek replied from his perch. "You expanded faster than your capacity to defend. You refused military alliances when they were offered. You conducted weapons research in restricted fields without council oversight. These are not the actions of a species seeking cooperation." The human delegation's table had 4 other members. Vance saw their faces, engineers, diplomats, xenobiologists, all watching him with expressions that ranged from terror to exhaustion to something he hadn't expected. Hoping. Not because they believed he could win, because they knew what came next. "The Velurian Empire has been arming Ilmater border patrols for 8 months, Vance said quietly. Threshold's eye cluster rotated toward him with mechanical precision. "That accusation is baseless." "Is it?" Vance looked at the Ilmater ambassador. 3 new weapons platforms on Threska's moon. 2 dreadnoughts transferred from Velurian surplus records to Ilmater registry. 27,000 units of refined war metals shipped through private carriers, registered to a Valurian trading guild that doesn't exist in any public database. The Ilmater's throat pouch deflated so rapidly, it made a wet slapping sound. Threshval stood, or rather, unfolded, because Valurians didn't stand so much as elevate their central segments on hydraulic-like limb structures. The human delegation will cease these baseless allegations immediately, or we will remove your speaking privileges for the remainder of the session. Vance tilted his head. You're going to silence us for telling the truth in a negotiation chamber. I'm going to silence you for disrupting council proceedings with fabricated intelligence, Threshval corrected. There is a difference. One is a violation of diplomatic protocol. The other is an act of bad faith that invalidates your entire petition. The Cathari ambassador clicked his beak. The human is stalling. They have no counteroffer, no leverage, no allies. He looked at the lesser species in the lower balconies, the ones who had already been broken by this process. They are exactly what we said they were. Loud, emotional, desperate. Vance sat back down. Myra's hand found his again. The hope on his delegation's faces had curdled into something else. Anticipation, maybe, or grief. One standard cycle, Threshval repeated. You will deliver your answer to the council secretariat by then. Failure to respond will be considered acceptance by default. By default, Vance said, tasting the words. You've been planning this for a long time. We have been planning for humanity's integration into galactic civilization, Threshval corrected. Your species has refused every opportunity to integrate peacefully. Now you will integrate on our terms, or you will be integrated by force. The chamber waited. The atmosphere processors whined. Somewhere above, a Cathari hatchling squawked and was silenced by its parent's wing. Vance looked at the data shard on the table. Then he looked at the council members, all 42 of them, arrayed in judgment like organs in a body that had long since forgotten it could die. One cycle, he said. We'll think about it. Threshval's mandibles spread wide, the Valurian expression of satisfaction. Wise decision. The council will reconvene at that time to receive humanity's formal acceptance. The session ended. Delegations rose, chattering among themselves about trade agreements and border disputes and the amusing spectacle of a minor species learning its place. Vance gathered his materials, placed the data shard carefully in his inner pocket, and walked toward the exit with his delegation trailing behind. They made it to the corridor before Myra grabbed his arm. You didn't tell them, she whispered. No, he agreed. What are we going to do? Vance stopped walking. He turned to face the Grand Assembly's massive doors, bone-white arches that had witnessed 12,000 cycles of submission, capitulation, and slow, grinding extinction. The thing they're most afraid of, he said. The Grand Assembly reconvened 23 standard cycles later. Vance had requested a private meeting with Threshval before the session. Denied. He had requested to present humanity's response in writing. Denied. He had requested that the council's security drones be calibrated to record his full statement without interference. Also denied. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to watch the ape thing break. Vance arrived at the human delegation's table, wearing the same diplomatic uniform he'd worn for every session. Dark fabric, no ornamentation, a single Earth flag pin on his collar. His delegation walked behind him in precise formation. 4 humans who had each signed waivers that morning acknowledging they might not return to their families. What's your play? Myra had asked him in the staging chamber 3 hours earlier. I'm going to tell them the truth, he replied. That's never worked before. It's never been the right truth before. The chamber was fuller than any previous session. Word had spread through the diplomatic corps. Humanity had found something. Something that made them smile at their own funeral. The upper balconies were packed with aides and attaches and intelligence officers from species that had no official stake in the proceedings but couldn't resist watching a species die. Threshval elevated himself to his full height. The Council recognizes the human delegation for their response to the terms of protected minor status. Vance stood. He didn't wait for relay drones. He projected his voice the old way, diaphragm, breath control, the muscle memory of a man who had once addressed crowds of 10,000 during Earth's unification wars. Humanity rejects the terms, he said. The chamber's ambient noise dropped to nothing. Even the atmosphere processors seemed to hold their breath. Threshval's eye cluster contracted. You misunderstand the consequences of rejection. No, Vance said. I understand them perfectly. You will declare our colonies unclaimed. Your allies will attack them. We will defend. You will use our defense as justification for full military intervention. Within 100 cycles, Earth will be a protectorate and my species will be your servants. He paused. I've read the history of every species in this room. That's how it always goes. Then why reject? Esserek demanded from his perch. If you understand the outcome, why choose it? Because you made one mistake in your calculations. Vance reached into his jacket. Every security drone tracked his hand. He withdrew the data shard, the same one from the previous session, and placed it on the table. You assumed we wanted to join your galaxy. You assumed we came here seeking acceptance, protection, a place at your table. He tapped the shard. We came here to tell you we're leaving. The shard activated. A holographic display bloomed above the human table, not a document, not a proposal, but a live feed. A fleet of human ships, tens of thousands of them, arrayed in a formation that stretched across the outer edge of the Sol system. Colony vessels. Cargo haulers converted to carry cryopods. Passenger liners stripped of luxury and packed with atmospheric processors, water recyclers, soil samples. Every ship humanity owned. Every ship humanity had ever built. 3 years ago, Vance said, Earth detected a series of gravitational anomalies beyond the galactic rim. Unexplained. Unstable. We sent probes. We found something you've been hiding from every species in this room. The feed shifted. The Council saw star charts, ancient, incomplete, marked with symbols that made the Ilmater ambassador's throat pouch pulse with recognition. The Velurian Empire has known for 2,000 cycles that the galaxy is dying, Vance continued. The core is collapsing. The spiral arms are destabilizing. In 300 cycles, half the habitable worlds in Council space will be uninhabitable. In 500, 90%. You've been hoarding evacuation data, choosing which species survive. Threshval's mandibles clicked rapidly, a distress signal in Velurian body language. These accusations are true, Esserek said suddenly, his feathers flattened. The Cathari Council has suspected for generations. We found fragments of the same data. We chose not to share it. He looked at the lesser species in the lower balconies. We chose to protect ourselves. Chaos erupted. Delegations shouted accusations. Security drones swarmed toward the Cathari perch. Somewhere above, a Xylos collective representative began transmitting on an open channel, panic, pure and simple, because the galaxy's oldest species had been caught hoarding salvation. Vance stood in the center of it all, untouched by the chaos. The human fleet will depart Sol in 72 hours, he said. We're not heading for the galactic rim. We're not heading for any mapped system. We've identified a corridor of stable space beyond the Council's detection range. We're going somewhere you will never find us. You'll die out there, Threshval snarled. No allies, no trade routes, no infrastructure. Your species will collapse within 3 generations. Maybe, Vance agreed, but we'll die free. And when your galaxy burns, when your empires crumble and your alliances shatter and your council dissolves into war over the last habitable worlds, he smiled. Not a predator's smile, a tired man's smile. You'll remember that you could have come with us. You could have asked. Instead, you mocked. He turned his back on the Grand Assembly. Humanity withdraws from this negotiation, he said, permanently. He walked. His delegation walked with him. Behind them, 42 species descended into screaming, accusation, and the first tremors of an alliance collapsing under its own weight. The doors closed. The war for the galaxy's last scraps of hope had just begun. The council chamber did not recover. For 3 full cycles, the Grand Assembly devolved into something closer to a riot, delegations shouting across species barriers, security drones firing suppression pulses at the more aggressive members, and the Velurian High Arbiter attempting to reassert control, while his own empire's secret crumbled around him. Threshval had ordered the Cathari ambassador detained. Sarek had laughed, actually laughed, and produced his own data shard, and another, and another. Evidence of Velurian conspiracy, evidence of Ilmater complicity, evidence that the Council's oldest members had been planning for extinction while pretending to govern toward prosperity. "We are not the villains here," Threshval thundered, his voice processors maxed to their legal limit. "The human delegation has fabricated this intelligence to destabilize the Council and escape accountability for their territorial violations." The Xylos Collective's representative pulsed a single word across the open channel: verify. And so they did. The verification process took 11 cycles. Council auditors descended on Velurian data archives. Ilmater military records were seized. Cathari intelligence agents traded their secrets for immunity, and by the end of the second cycle, even Threshval's own aides were turning on him. The truth was worse than Vance had suggested. The Velurian Empire hadn't just hoarded evacuation data. They had actively suppressed research into alternative solutions. 3 species had been on the verge of developing gravity stabilization technology that could have extended the galaxy's lifespan by thousands of cycles. Those research programs had suffered unfortunate accidents. Those species had accepted generous compensation packages to redirect their efforts toward Velurian-approved projects. The Council had been dying by design, a slow, controlled collapse engineered by the species that expected to survive it. "The humans knew," whispered the Grillan technocracy's representative, the first words they had spoken in 40 sessions. "They knew and they didn't weaponize it. They just left." "They weaponized it by leaving," Sarek corrected. His feathers were matted from his time in detention, but his eyes, those ancient, calculating Cathari eyes, were sharp. "Every species in this chamber is now fighting over who gets to die last. The humans removed themselves from the equation. They made us fight each other." The Council erupted again. Accusations. Demands. The Ilmater ambassador physically attacked the Velurian representative, a breach of protocol so severe that security drones had to stun both parties. The Xylos Collective withdrew from the assembly entirely, their hive mind deciding that individual survival was preferable to collective governance. In the chaos, no one noticed the transmission. It arrived on every council frequency, encrypted with human ciphers, routed through 19 relay stations that technically didn't exist, and timestamped 72 hours after the human fleet's scheduled departure from Sol. Vance's face appeared on screens across the Grand Assembly. He looked older than he had at the negotiation table, thinner. His uniform was gone, replaced by a standard fleet-issue jumpsuit with the Earth flag stitched over his heart. "You're probably fighting each other right now," he said. "That's fine. That's what empires do when they realize they're mortal, but I wanted to show you something before you tear each other apart." The feed shifted. Behind Vance, through a viewport, the human fleet stretched across the black, tens of thousands of ships, arranged in a formation that looked almost ceremonial. Colony vessels at the core, cargo haulers on the perimeter, passenger liners stuffed with cryopods containing the genetic material of every endangered species humanity had ever preserved, because humans were sentimental like that. But that wasn't what Vance wanted them to see. 3 years ago, when we detected the gravitational anomalies beyond the galactic rim, we sent probes. You know that. What you don't know is what the probes found. He paused. A pathway, not a route through space, a shortcut. Something your ancient ancestors tried to build and abandoned because they couldn't control it. The Valurian records called it unstable. The Cathari called it the fracture between what is and what could be. He smiled, a human smile, tired, genuine, and utterly terrifying. We figured out how to stabilize it. The council chamber went silent. Not the silence of shock, the silence of 42 species collectively realizing they had just made the greatest diplomatic error in galactic history. We're not going to tell you where the pathway leads, Vance continued. We're not going to share our stabilizer technology. You had 300 years to treat us as equals. You chose to treat us as children. So we're going to a galaxy you will never reach, through a door you will never open, and we're going to build something new. He leaned closer to the camera. But before we go, I wanted to thank you. You see, the Council's greatest fear wasn't that humanity would become powerful. It was that humanity would become independent. That we would prove a species could thrive without your approval, your protection, your permission to exist. He reached toward the camera. The feed began to distort. We just proved it. The transmission ended. The council chamber remained frozen for exactly 4 seconds, and then the fighting resumed, worse than before, because now they knew. The humans were gone, the salvation was unreachable, and the galaxy's only hope had just walked out the door. The Valurian Empire's response came within hours. Not diplomatic channels, military ones. Threshval had lost control of the council, but he still commanded the largest fleet in known space. 23,000 warships, ranging from scouts to dreadnoughts, all crewed by soldiers who had spent their entire careers enforcing Valurian will. If he couldn't rule the council, he would rule the ashes. We will pursue the human fleet, he announced to what remained of his command structure. We will capture their stabilizer technology. We will use it to claim the new galaxy for Valurian expansion, and we will leave the council to burn. His admirals hesitated. The human fleet had a 72-hour head start. The gravitational anomalies were poorly mapped. The stabilizer technology was an unknown variable. You fear the humans, Threshval observed. You've read their histories. You've seen their capacity for violence. You're wondering if chasing them into the unknown is worth the risk. The lead admiral, a female named Vreshkor who had never lost a battle, stepped forward. I fear wasting resources on a species that has already surrendered their territory. The human fleet is fleeing. Let them flee. We should consolidate our position here, seize control of council space, and prepare for the core collapse. The human fleet is not fleeing, Threshval replied. The human fleet is expanding. If we allow them to establish a foothold in a new galaxy, they will return. They will return with technologies we cannot imagine, strategies we cannot counter, and a grudge that will outlive our empire. He activated a holographic display. The human fleet's formation resolved. Tens of thousands of ships, moving in perfect synchronization despite their varied origins. Colony vessels protected by cargo haulers. Passenger liners surrounded by mining barges. A fleet that had no business being as organized as it appeared. They've been planning this for years, Vreshkor said quietly. They didn't stumble into this escape. They engineered it. Of course they did, Threshval said. They're human. They've been engineering escape since before they had language. That's what makes them dangerous. Not their weapons. Their refusal to accept extinction as an answer. The Valurian fleet departed within 6 cycles. 23,000 warships, their drives pushed to maximum output, racing toward the gravitational anomalies at the galaxy's edge. Behind them, the council fragmented into civil war, old alliances shattering, new grudges forming, the galaxy's great powers tearing each other apart over the scraps of a dying civilization. The chase took 4 days. The Valurian fleet caught the human rearguard at the edge of the anomalies, a region of space where gravity twisted into knots and navigation required constant recalculation. The human fleet had already begun transitioning through the pathway, their colony vessels disappearing into the distortion one by one. But they had left something behind. A wall of ships, not warships. The humans had decommissioned their military fleet, just as the Council demanded. These were retrofitted civilian vessels, mining barges with armor plating welded to their hulls, cargo haulers carrying missile pods instead of supplies, passenger liners with point defense cannons bolted to their observation decks. A fleet of ghosts, a fleet that had no right to fight, a fleet that stood between the Valurian Empire and humanity's future. Vreshkor ordered the attack. She expected a slaughter, 23,000 warships against a few thousand civilian conversions. The humans would fire a few desperate volleys, watch their ships disintegrate, and scatter into the anomalies in panic. That was not what happened. The human ships didn't scatter. They didn't panic. They fought like they had been waiting for this moment their entire existence, because in a way they had. Every mining barge had been retrofitted by engineers who grew up watching their parents survive famines, wars, ecological collapses. Every cargo hauler carried weapons designed by people who had turned cave walls into fortresses and sticks into spears and sticks with fire into civilization itself. The humans were not good at building empires. They were exceptional at building walls. The first Valurian wave disintegrated against a barrage of kinetic projectiles, mining railguns repurposed to fire at warships. The second wave encountered minefields constructed from cargo containers and proximity fuses. The third wave reached the human line and discovered that passenger liners, when stripped of safety features and packed with explosives, made excellent suicide rams. Vreshkor watched her fleet bleed. "What are they fighting for?" she demanded. "They've already escaped. Their colony vessels are through the pathway. These ships are sacrificial." Her tactical officer, a young Valurian named Threshvan, no relation to the High Arbiter, studied the battle display with an expression she had never seen on a Valurian face. "Fear. They're not fighting to win," he said. "They're fighting to send a message." "What message?" Threshvan pulled up the human fleet's transmission logs. One message, repeated on all frequencies, encrypted in a code so simple that even Valurian children could read it. "We remember." Vreshkor stared at the words. "Remember what?" "Everything," Threshvan replied. "Every slight, every mockery, every time the Council laughed at them. They're not just defending their escape, they're settling a debt." The battle continued for 11 hours. The Valurian fleet lost 2,000 ships, a fraction of their total strength, but more than they had lost in any conflict since the Ilmater Rebellion 3,000 cycles before. The human rearguard was destroyed to the last vessel. Every mining barge, every cargo hauler, every passenger liner turned improvised warship. But the colony fleet had made it through. And somewhere in the chaos, as the last human ship exploded and the Valurian fleet regrouped for pursuit, Vreshkor received a transmission from Threshval. "Return to Valuria Prime," he ordered. "The Council has collapsed. The Ilmater are attacking our border worlds. The Cathari have declared war on the Xylos Collective. The galaxy is burning." "What about the humans?" she asked. Threshval was silent for a long moment. "The humans are gone," he said. "Leave them to the dark." Vreshkor did not leave them to the dark. She was a soldier. She had been bred for pursuit, engineered for victory, conditioned to believe that no prey escaped the Valurian Empire. The High Arbiter's order was political, a concession to the chaos-consuming council space. But politics had never won a war. Politics had never secured a future. "We will pursue," she announced to her remaining fleet. "The human colony vessels are slow. Their crews are exhausted. Their rearguard is destroyed. They cannot defend themselves. Her tactical officer, Threshvan, raised a manipulator in caution. The pathway is unstable. Our navigators cannot guarantee safe transit. The humans had stabilizer technology that we do not possess. The humans had stabilizer technology that we will capture, Vreshkor corrected. The colony fleet is carrying it. We destroy their ships, we salvage the remains, we reverse engineer the technology. Then we claim the new galaxy for Veluria, and the Council's war becomes irrelevant. It was a gamble. Every officer in the fleet knew it. But the alternative was returning to Veluria Prime and watching their empire crumble like all the others. The core was collapsing. The galaxy was dying. The humans had found a door, and Vreshkor intended to force it open. The fleet transited the pathway 17 hours after the battle's end. The transition was violent, more violent than anyone expected. The anomalies twisted the Velurian ships like paper in a current. 3 dreadnoughts emerged with their hulls fractured, atmosphere venting into the void. 5 cruisers never emerged at all, their crews lost to the space between spaces. But the majority survived. 15,000 warships, battered but functional, emerging into a region of space that no Council species had ever recorded. No stars, no planets, no debris, just darkness, absolute and endless, with the faintest suggestion of something enormous waiting at the edge of sensor range. "Where are the humans?" Vreshkor demanded. Her sensor officers scrambled to recalibrate. The anomalies had disrupted their equipment. Gravity bent in directions that made no sense. Time seemed to stretch and contract, minutes passing like hours, hours like seconds. Then they found them. The human colony fleet was 2 days ahead, moving at maximum sublight speed toward a formation of gravitational lenses. The pathway's exit points, each one leading to a different region of the new galaxy. The humans had already split into smaller groups, each heading for a different lens, each carrying a fragment of their species' future. "They're scattering," Threshvan observed. "We can't pursue them all." "We don't need to," Vreshkor replied. "We only need one, the fleet carrying the stabilizer technology." She ordered her ships to divide. The largest group would pursue the main colony concentration, the ships carrying the most humans, the most resources, the most hope. Smaller groups would chase the others, ensuring that no survivors could warn the rest. The chase lasted 9 days. The human colony ships were slower than Velurian warships, deliberately so, because they carried cryopods and soil samples and the accumulated weight of a species' history. Every day, the Velurian fleet closed the distance. Every day, the humans jettisoned non-essential cargo to gain speed. Every day, the gap narrowed. On the 4th day, the humans tried something desperate. They launched their remaining defensive ships, a handful of retrofitted vessels that had survived the rearguard battle, on a suicide course toward the Velurian vanguard. The ships exploded before reaching their targets, scattering debris across the Velurian formation. Not enough to destroy, not enough to slow, but enough to blind. The debris cloud contained chaff, millions of tiny fragments designed to confuse Velurian sensors. The humans had packed their sacrificial ships with the stuff, turning their own deaths into a smokescreen. Vreshkor's fleet emerged from the cloud to find the human colony ships had changed course, veering toward a different gravitational lens than their original destination. "They're adapting," Threshvan said, and his voice held something that sounded like respect. "Every time we anticipate their next move, they change the pattern." "Then we stop anticipating," Vreshkor replied. "We accelerate to maximum velocity. We ignore defensive tactics. We catch them before they reach the lens." The fleet accelerated, drives pushed beyond their rated tolerances, crews strapped into crash couches as the ships shuddered and groaned. The gap closed, 20 hours, 15, 10. On the 9th day, the human colony fleet reached the gravitational lens. Vreshkor watched on her display as the first human ship entered the distortion, a colony vessel carrying 10,000 cryopods, each one containing a human child frozen in suspended animation. The ship twisted, compressed, and vanished into the lens. Then the second ship, the third, the fourth. "We're not going to catch them," Threshvan said. "We only need to catch one," Vreshkor repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. The humans were too fast, too desperate, too determined. The fifth ship entered the lens, the sixth, the seventh. And then the eighth ship stopped. Not because the Velurian fleet had caught it. Not because its engines had failed. It stopped because a single figure appeared on the ship's external hull, a human in a pressure suit, holding something that glowed with the same unstable energy as the gravitational anomalies. Vance. He had transferred to the rearguard vessel sometime during the chase. He had been waiting for this moment. He raised the glowing object, a stabilizer, Vreshkor realized, a portable version of the technology that let human ships transit the pathway safely, and hurled it into the lens. The lens collapsed. Not slowly, not gently, it collapsed like a dying star, folding in on itself with a violence that sent shockwaves rippling through the Velurian fleet. The remaining human colony ships, the ones that hadn't yet transited, were caught in the collapse, their hulls buckling, their cryopods venting into space. But Vance was gone. The lens had taken him, or destroyed him, or deposited him somewhere beyond even Vreshkor's imagination. And the Velurian fleet was stranded. No pathway back to Council space. No way forward through the collapsed lens. No stabilizer technology to salvage. Just 15,000 warships, a dying galaxy behind them, and a darkness ahead that offered nothing but silence. Vreshkor stared at her display for a long time. "He sacrificed himself," she said finally. "He sacrificed his own people, the ships that didn't make it through. He collapsed the lens to stop us." Threshvan said nothing. There was nothing to say. The humans had won, not through superior firepower, not through tactical brilliance. Through the willingness to burn down their own future, rather than share it with their enemies. The Velurian fleet turned back toward the dying galaxy. Behind them, the collapsed lens flickered once, a ghost of light in the darkness, and went dark. 300 cycles passed. The galaxy did not die quietly. The core collapse accelerated, consuming star systems in waves of gravitational distortion. The Council's great empires shattered into warlord states, each one fighting for the last habitable worlds. The Ilmater were the first to fall, their amphibian biology unable to adapt to the changing atmospheric conditions. The Cathari followed, their ancient perches overrun by refugees from a dozen smaller species. The Xylos collective dissolved into its constituent hives, each one claiming to be the true successor to a government that no longer existed. The Velurian Empire lasted longer than most. Threshval died in the first decade of the collapse, assassinated by his own admirals after ordering a genocide against the Grillan technocracy. Vreshkor returned from her failed pursuit to find her species in chaos, her fleet reduced to piracy, her empire reduced to memory. She spent the next 2 centuries fighting a war she could not win, against an enemy she could not defeat, for a future that no longer existed. And then the signal arrived. It came from beyond the galactic rim, from the region of space where the humans had vanished 3 centuries before. The signal was weak, distorted by the gravitational anomalies that still twisted through the void, but it was unmistakably artificial. Unmistakably intentional. Unmistakably human. Vreshkor received the transmission on her flagship's bridge, surrounded by the remnants of her fleet and the ruins of her species' pride. The signal resolved into an image, a star, burning bright against the darkness, surrounded by the unmistakable structures of orbital habitation. A new star, a star that had not existed 3 centuries ago. The humans ignited it, her tactical officer whispered, a descendant of Threshvan who had died in the collapse's second decade. They found a way to create stars, to create worlds, to create everything we thought we had lost. The transmission shifted. A face appeared on the screen, human, female, ancient in a way that transcended physical age. Her eyes held the weight of 300 cycles of solitude. Her voice held the weight of everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. "You're probably dead," she said. "Most of you are. The galaxy we left behind was dying and you were too busy killing each other to notice. But someone is receiving this message. Someone is still listening. Someone is still hopping." She paused. Behind her, through a viewport, the new star burned. "We found a galaxy. Not empty, there are ruins here. Remnants of something that came before. Something that tried to build a bridge between stars and failed. We finished their work. We built a door and we walked through it and we found a home." She smiled, a human smile, tired, genuine, and utterly defiant. "You mocked us for being alone. You laughed at us for being desperate. You tried to make us your servants because you couldn't imagine a future where we didn't need you. But we never needed you. We needed each other. We needed the stubborn refusal to die that got us through ice ages and asteroid strikes and wars that should have ended us. We needed the memory of every ancestor who looked at extinction and said, 'Not today.'" She leaned closer to the camera. "We're not coming back. This galaxy is ours. These stars are ours. These worlds, the ones we're building, the ones we're waking from frozen sleep, the ones we're filling with children who will never know your names, they're ours. You had your chance. You chose to laugh." The transmission began to distort. The gravitational anomalies were pulling it apart, consuming it the way they had consumed the Council's empires and the Valurian fleet and everything else that had tried to force the door. "But we wanted you to know," the woman continued, her voice breaking through the distortion. "We wanted you to know that we made it, that we survived, that every time you laughed at us, every time you mocked us, every time you decided we weren't worthy of your galaxy, we were building our own." The image flickered. The new star blazed one final time. "Humanity does not kneel," she said. "Humanity walks, and we walked so far that you will never ever catch us." The transmission ended. Vreshkor stood on her bridge, surrounded by silence, staring at a screen that showed nothing but static. Behind her, the remnants of her fleet drifted in a galaxy that had already forgotten its own history. Ahead, through the gravitational anomalies, a new star burned in a galaxy that would never welcome her kind. She thought about Vance, about the rearguard, about the lens collapsing and the colony ships scattering and the human who had sacrificed everything to protect a future he would never see. "They won," she said finally. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement of fact delivered by a soldier who had spent 3 centuries chasing a victory that was never possible. Her tactical officer, the last of Threshvan's line, turned to face her. "What do we do now?" Vreshkor looked at the static on her screen, at the ruins of her fleet, at the dying galaxy that stretched in every direction, offering nothing but silence and the slow, grinding certainty of extinction. "We remember," she said. "We remember that there was once a species that refused to die, a species that looked at the end of everything and built a door, a species that chose freedom over safety, hope over certainty, the unknown over the familiar." She turned away from the screen. "And we tell their story to anyone who's left, to anyone who's listening, to anyone who needs to know that extinction is not inevitable, that surrender is not the only answer, that somewhere in a galaxy beyond the dark, humanity survived." The signal faded. The new star dimmed. The gravitational anomalies twisted one final time and then silence. But it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of a door closing, of a species walking away from everything they had ever known, of a future that would never include the Council's empires or the Valurian fleet or the laughter of species who thought they could mock their way to salvation. It was the silence of humans, finally, impossibly home. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the human fleet drifted toward a new star. Children woke from frozen sleep. Engineers calibrated star ignition protocols. Historians recorded the story of the Council's mockery and humanity's walkout, and the long, impossible journey to a place where no one would ever laugh at them again. They had been mocked. They had been dismissed. They had been told they were too loud, too emotional, too desperate, too human to deserve a place at the galaxy's table. So they built their own table, their own galaxy, their own future. And they never looked back. The end.